philosophy, questioning, enlightenment, deep conversation, spirituality. This is the Spiritual Download. Welcome to the Spiritual Download. Today I'm having a conversation with Jon Bernie. Hi, Jon.
Hi, good to see you, Kyle. I'm glad to be here with you today and all your friends.
Yeah, so today we're just going to start to get to know Jon. I think we're going to start looking at on his about page on his website, jonbernie.org. The second paragraph says, a series of early awakening experiences as a teenager led to Jon to ordain as a monk in the lineage of Shunryu Suzuki Roshi, and subsequently to the practice of retreat-based Vipassana insight meditation as an early student of Jack Kornfield. Could you expand a little bit on your initial kind of experiences that it says here with kind of early awakenings as a teenager?
Mm-hmm. Well, for people who want to get more information, there's a pretty interesting write-up on my website that I think is in the bio section, a pretty detailed description. I don't know how much we want to go into that now because it can be a very short story or it can be a longer description. But I think in those days when I was pretty young, I was really had a very questioning mind, and I was a concert violinist performing, and I was also, a straight A student trying to get into Stanford and wanting to go to med school. So I had certain goals in my mind. It was very high achieving and very hardworking. And I think part of me at that time was really questioning what's the deeper meaning of life? I mean, if you really want to put it in simple terms. And those questions and that inner questioning of meaning and purpose led me to, I don't know how, because I didn't really have a religious background. I didn't really know what meditation was. I didn't know anything about that. Led me to have an experience where I was sitting in my beanbag chair at the time, staring at the wall in my bedroom. And I wasn't on drugs or anything like that. But I had this deep sense that I had to just pay attention in some way, and somehow I would find the deeper truth of life. That's what motivated me. And I had a profound experience at that time that completely changed my consciousness and got me very, very interested in, drawn to, at the time, yoga and meditation practice. I went to college and then I took a leave of absence, and I eventually became a Zen Buddhist monk. As Zen student, and then became a monk and did many years of Zen practice, meditation practice. And then I met Jack Kornfield when he first came here to the Bay Area, and sat with him for many years. And then eventually started going on my own retreats and having all kinds of inner experience. Plus, at the same time, I was developing, I had natural healing ability, and I started learning various modalities for working with people so I could have a career and work originally as an Alexander teacher, craniosacral therapy, zero balancing work, Amane work, neurolinguistic programming. There were a lot of different trainings that I went through, and so I had a kind of dual development in my inner training of both doing meditation practice, inner practice. A deep process of transformation was happening through me on a lot of levels, and so I was working both in healing and also spiritual transformation. Eventually, I met my first. I had a close relationship probably with the first teacher I would consider profoundly realized, and that was Jean Klein, who was a student of, for people who may know some of these people, like Francis Lucille, who's one of his students, is Rupert Spira, and who I think, or Spira, who's become quite well known. Anyway, Jean and I was close to Jean and had a very profound shift with him. And then I was eventually invited by Papaji, Punjaji to come and see him in India. And he was one of Ramana Maharshi's disciples. I spent time, about 6 weeks with him in India back in '91. And then I went and had a wonderful interaction with Robert Adams, who was also very close to Ramana Maharshi, and had very profound time with him. And then Adyashanti and I met and became close back in the beginning of 2000, I think. And then he eventually sort of acknowledged me as a teacher, and I started doing the work I'm doing now. But I had, for many years before that, led meditation groups and had a healing practice, full-time practice. And so that's kind of that's like the quick life journey from age 16, which was in 1969, to now, where I'm almost 67, where we're at. So now I have students all over the world that I'm working with on Skype and phone, and also in person here in San Francisco, lead retreats. By the way, for people who want to find the website, it's JONBERNIE, in case you want to find it, .org. I've written a couple of books that have been published, and I'm more inspired than I ever have been. I'm finding that there are more and more people who are in the young generation, I would say, who are, I would say, naturally awakening without necessarily any external teaching, which is very interesting to me. I do think it is a kind of natural evolution of the species, and so they're not necessarily in need of ancient teachings, even though a lot of times those teachings and practices are very, very, very helpful. And so, interestingly enough, what started at 16 as a very powerful transformative experience literally not only changed my whole life, but led the direction of my life. And I say what was discovered then deeply, profoundly, is what I teach and what I'm in service to, and what I help others get access to in themselves for both healing and transformation. Is that helpful?
Yeah, that's really, really helpful. I think it's a really good synopsis of kind of who you are in like, 5 minutes. That's perfect. And I kind of want to dive into how did your decision-making process go from when you kind of maybe almost like an average teenager where you're thinking about going to college, you're striving to be a musician, you're trying to keep up grades, and then all of a sudden you have this opening, and then you're considering going to be a Zen monk. So
Well, that took a long time. I mean, it wasn't obvious, that's for sure. It was a slow process, and but I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Go ahead.
No, I was just asking kind of like, what was your inner experience? Specifically, I want to know, like, there must have been like a strong sense of trust in the developing process of becoming a monk and kind of opening up to this world of consciousness.
I think the bottom line was very simple, and I think it motivates just about everybody, which is that I was suffering and I didn't want to be. I mean, I think I looked around and I saw people who were successful, and, friends of my parents who were, had careers and everything else, very successful, and somehow it wasn't convincing to me. It was like, yeah, okay, but is that really it? And I think that I was really wanting to find true happiness. I was wanting to find true fulfillment that wasn't conditional. And so that was really, that grew in me over time. So I was in college, and the monk thing didn't happen for quite a while. I mean, a lot of things led up to before that happened. That was a slow, over years development. It wasn't like, I think it's funny though, after I did have the experience, I remember saying to my mom that I was going to be a monk, and she said, okay, honey, she was very supportive. When I was 11, I was arguing with a Sunday school teacher about the existence of God, and I wasn't buying it because I really had very much a science orientation at that time. And I left Sunday school, and I told my mother I wasn't going to go to Sunday school anymore because I was too busy practicing the violin. And I decided that when I saw God, I would believe it. You know what I mean? It was like I really had an empiricist kind of point of view, and I felt that all my friends in all the respective religions were basically being brainwashed. And I was just somebody who was more experientially oriented. So for me, everything was experience-based, and it still is. So I don't really attract followers and believers. I really attract people who I think can think for themselves and are interesting and who can ask questions and really are willing to, as I say, you know, put on hiking boots and explore unknown territory and put on a lab coat and be in the laboratory and watch the experiment, because that's really what you need on this journey is those attitudes. And that's what I have discovered on my own and continue to this day. And so there isn't this preconceived idea. I mean, of course, when I got started and I started reading about enlightenment and all that, I had natural, naive points of view that ultimately were shown to be, you know, not how it happens. And there's a lot of ideas that people come in on the path because they've heard some story or somebody's process or somebody's awakening or enlightenment, whatever. And they think, oh, that's what's going to happen to me. It's because so-and-so had this experience, that's how it's going to happen for me. But that's not really true. And so what really happens is that if a person is drawn to this natural, what we call awakening, it's really happening within them. It's like you're a rose, but you don't know it. And so but something in you is growing and rooting and branching and eventually flowering. And so what my sense is at this point is that for those where that is happening for them, whether they have beliefs or not about it, whether they even know about spirituality or not, doesn't even matter, that it's going to happen. And coming into an environment that, for instance, I work with, where people tune in much more deeply to presence, you might say, is a kind of fertile environment that helps that flowering happen. So it has nothing to do with what they believe, and it's really not a personal endeavor. And that's really a lot of what the non-dual people are trying to point out today, is that there's no doing, it's non-doing. It's not, it's really freedom from the personal identified self. I think a lot of those concepts really get misunderstood from a relative point of view, and I don't use them that much. I do explain them for people who need to have a kind of sense of it, but I usually like to describe speaking about things either relatively speaking or absolutely, but ultimately they're not separate at all. I don't know if I'm jumping around too much, but.
Yeah, no, it's kind of just making me think of how I think spirituality is almost more available now for people. I don't know if, you know, during the 70s and 80s, kind of when you were getting started on the spiritual path, you almost had to really find someone who was
60s.
Yeah, in the 60s.
Oh no, it was, I mean, when I first started doing yoga, no, I think when I first wanted to do yoga, there was one book on yoga in the library. There was no internet, there were no computers, there were no cell phones, there were none of that. There wasn't much. Or you had to go to India, you know, or you had to wait 6 months or a year for somebody to show up here. And so, oh no, it was not, it grew, of course. I mean, there were things that were here and that were developing, and that's what we took advantage of, you know. But even a lot of that was, you know, that was a lot of years ago. We're talking 50 years ago. Can't believe it's so long.
So is the wider availability of spiritual teachings, experiences, is that what you mean by this, like, species development and evolution, or
No. Well, I'm sure that's all part of it. Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised. I hadn't thought of it that way, but yes, I would assume that there's more available because there's more interest and there's more. That makes sense. That makes total sense. Exactly. I see it more in the people I'm working with. So I work with people who are like even 18, 19 years old, who've had an awakening, and or people who haven't had any background, and they read about it and they said, I think this happened to me, and they're like an attorney, you know, living somewhere, and they don't know anything about it. So it's not about the fact that you necessarily been going on long retreats or have learned all the spiritual literature. I mean, those things may or may not be helpful to the path that you're on, actually. I think ultimately we have to become how can I say this? I think ultimately we have to return to a place that we may not even know, which is really what Suzuki Roshi referred to as beginner's mind, which is a mind that is open and is available, but doesn't have a preconceived idea about what's happening. So that's where a lot of people get into problems. There's a lot of information downloading, and you can go on the internet and find anything, basically, and everything about anything, pretty much. But it doesn't change the fact that you still have to be right where you are, which is where you always have been and always will be. And how are you right here, right now? How is it possible for you to be here? And you asked me earlier, how is it for you? And I'm right here, always. And the experience of that is the profound interconnectedness of being. It's so natural and all the time that I don't think about it. I think when people first start experiencing it, it's like they're in bliss, they're like high, they're like stoned or whatever, is very altered state kind of sense. But after a while, it's just ordinary and natural, and it's just the way we really are. Actually, it's the way we're meant to be. I actually met a friend. I had a friend many years ago. I don't know, a long time ago. He was in his 20s, and he was enlightened. He was actually incredibly radiant. And I said, his name was Brian. I said, how did you get like this? He says, I've always been like this. And I said, well, who raised you? He said, well, my mom and my aunt. And when I asked him more questions and listened to it, I found out that he was raised in an environment where he never, I don't know, he was so supported. They didn't have to put up all these barriers, all these protective mechanisms, and he was naturally radiant. And I think that's really how we are. I think it's our natural state. So enlightenment, so-called enlightenment and awakening really are it's not something that we accomplish or that because we believe in and work hard at that we get. It's really more that we become sensitive and available to our own nervous systems, to our own thinking, to our own sensory functioning, that we begin to notice this deeper realm called presence, vastness, interconnectedness. And because when people start becoming aware of that, can often bring up vulnerability. And that's a lot of the work that I do in the healing work. This is why my background as a healer and therapist in the way that I am is very helpful, because people are often afraid of the process because it's threatening. It feels threatening because the ego is really all about control and survival and manipulation and getting what it wants and not getting what it doesn't want. And the process of becoming integrated spiritually or realized is really one of letting go of that kind of control. And so the process will often, not only that, but will bring more light into the system, more awareness into the system. And because of that, it will actually illuminate often dark sides of our unconscious. And so that can actually, it can actually bring up more dark material, and people can often, I call that the root awakening. So it follows the actual awakening, and that's why people often don't want to come on retreats, because they don't like how it works. It's very difficult to have to face. We want instant enlightenment where there's no more problems, no more issues, there's no more dark side. And as far as I've seen, that's just not how it works for most people most of the time. It's usually more a kind of access to presence, a kind of glimpse or a taste of the truth, and that eventually grows over time, eventually becomes more integrated into the system. And in that process, there's a kind of, if it's fully matured in a human being, then it will actually begin to allow them to become more healed mentally, emotionally, through their past, their psychodynamics and so forth. What the danger that a lot of people run into, unfortunately, and even teachers who are out there, is that people can develop access to the power of that, but then kind of disassociate themselves from their dark side, push it aside, and just have this sort of glorified spiritual identity that's unconscious. And they are very charismatic, very powerful, and yet haven't really done the personal work that they never did. And that eventually causes a lot of problems. And that's why you hear all of these abusive stories of gurus and things like that that are still happening today. And so I just really caution your listeners to be careful of who they're getting connected to, because just because someone's very charismatic, just because you feel their presence and their love, that just means they're powerful. That's all. Does it mean you can trust them? No. Does it mean that they are clear and that they're, no, it doesn't mean that. It just means that they're powerful. So that's where I think a lot of people need to be, we have learned, my generation, I'd say, has learned the hard way about that. And I think younger generations, I think, getting hipper about that. And I know one of my students, who's a graduate student at Stanford, said I was the first spiritual teacher that he didn't think was full of shit. And so I thought that was really a nice compliment. Because I wasn't afraid to show that I'm a human being. I think a lot of people think that somehow when you're enlightened, you're going to be a saint. And I'm sorry, saints are human beings. I mean, I know I've been very close to some pretty amazing people, and they're all human beings. And that's, I think, one of the dangers of people seeing people in a very rarefied environment of a stage, or just some kind of very, altered environment where everyone's really kind of, in bliss or whatever. That's nice. But, we are human beings, and it's important to be able to allow ourselves to be human beings. I think that's one of the things that many of my students have thanked me for, who have, I have so many letters of gratitude from people from all over that changed their life, saved their life. And that even, and quite a few who become realized, said that one of the most important things in the example of me was that I was just ordinary. You wouldn't know it. I was a normal human being. You wouldn't know it unless you were really tuned in, unless you were open, unless you were really sensing into this. You wouldn't necessarily know that somebody was awake. It's not like they're necessarily wearing robes and have a shaved head or have a whole entourage or whatever. They're just ordinary people in the world. And there's plenty of realized people in the world that are just living ordinary lives. They're not teachers, they're not saints, they're not spiritual teachers, none of that. So.
Yeah, I'm kind of thinking of people who do come to satsang, and maybe they have like pain and suffering in their lives, and they kind of almost they need that figure or that mentor in their lives almost. But do you have any advice for these people who maybe they do feel pain and they're trying to seek to relieve that pain?
Absolutely.
Or a spiritual teacher?
I'm working with that every single day, all day long, in my private work and in my public work. The online satsangs I'm doing are getting incredible. People are loving them. And those are really great if people want to join, because I work with people in a group either 2 to 4 hours now with people all over the world, and they're very inexpensive and easy to join. And I work with individuals, and people have had awakenings in those. And I'll work with people who have tremendous stuff going on with. Often when people start accessing this, they have side effects, like a lot of overwhelming kundalini kinds of experiences, a lot of energy shooting through their body. They can have very difficult personal stuff that they haven't been able to integrate. And so, yeah, I work with that all of the time. And the environment is very deeply supportive. In other words, the presence that's there in the environment, whether it's either online or in person, is profoundly supportive and healing. And it's also a working field. So it's a therapeutic environment, and it's a transformative environment. It isn't about concept. It isn't about getting some better. I mean, often for some people, however, in their process of transformation, what very often needs to happen is what I would call a bringing forth of a new attitude about what's going on with them, because often we can have a very limited attitude about what's happening, or we think it's a certain way, we have a certain conclusion. So people learn how to become less and less attached to what they think is how it is. In other words, there's this famous kind of wise man, fool character named Mullah Nasruddin, and there's stories about him. And somebody comes to borrow his donkey. Do you know the story? Have you heard it?
No.
Yeah,
No.
somebody comes to borrow his donkey, you know, and he's going to be going to the market to bring all of his vegetables and his whatever that he has to sell at the market. And Mullah Nasruddin said he could borrow his donkey. And so he goes over and he knocks on the door and he says, "Hi, Mullah, I'm here to borrow the donkey." He goes, "Oh, I'm sorry. I lent him out to somebody else." He said, "But you said I could borrow him today and I need to go to the market. It's Saturday. I have to go to the market. I have to bring the best." And he said, "I'm really sorry. I forgot. I lent it to somebody else." So he's leaving. He's really upset. He's really disappointed. He's angry. He's walking away. And as he's walking away, he can hear in the backyard the donkey braying. And he's like really upset. And he comes in, he pounds on the door. Mullah opens the door. He goes, "What do you mean that you lent out the donkey? I can hear the donkey braying in the backyard." And Mullah says, "Well, who are you going to believe, me or the donkey?" So, you know, I think that often what happens is people begin to have to wake up to the attachment to certain attitudes or certain beliefs that they have, and begin to have their, literally what happens in this process of transformation, Kyle, is literally a breakthrough of the paradigm that you've been living in. And that movement, that breakthrough of the paradigm of how you've been living is literally the evolutionary force of life itself. It's the creative force of life. It's the evolutionary force of life. It's the intelligent force of life. We are that. That is what's referred to as God, as cosmic consciousness, as presence, as non-dual awareness, it's as the Tao. It's all this ultimate reality of consciousness that we are. And it's completely unknowable on a cognitive level. It's not something that can be explained, but it is something that can be realized. And so that's the real truth. See? And so once you've accessed it, which is what happened to me when I was 16, I had no idea what had happened to me. I didn't know what had happened to me until I was 20. I was having these extraordinary experiences happening through me, even when I was in trigonometry class in high school. I'd be sitting there listening to a lecture and there'd be like these energies moving through me, and I didn't know, I began to get worried. I was going crazy. You know, I wasn't, but I was worried. You know, a friend of mine had gone crazy, and he broke down mentally and had an abusive father and ended up in a mental hospital. And I thought, oh my God, maybe I'm going crazy. And I kind of tried to stop whatever was happening because I didn't know it was happening. And it wasn't until I was 20 years old and met with an amazing woman, Ann Armstrong, who was this incredible friend and mentor to me back in the early days, extraordinary psychic who Suzuki Roshi was close to and felt was totally authentic. And she said to me, "You have had an enlightenment experience. That's what's happened to you." Because I didn't know. And I didn't know for 4 years what had happened to me. And by then I had already been drawn to Zen practice. And so interestingly, I think you naturally are drawn to things that are going to help cultivate and develop what this is that's happening, right? So anyway, I'm all over the place, but it's fun.
That's all right. One question I had was like, do you think Zen was like this nice balance between, because it seemed like you were very like disciplined, like academic and very almost like left-brained and very analytical. And the Zen was almost like, okay, here is a practice that's going to slow down your mind, slow down your body. Is that what you needed at the time?
I wouldn't, yeah, that's interesting. The discipline from my violin playing and my background of practicing, because, you know, I practiced 2 to 4 hours a day from age 6 to age 20 and literally had a career performing as a young person. So I was naturally disciplined. I think Zen training actually requires discipline. It's particularly when it's coming from the Japanese historical tradition, that the practices that I did were from Japan and China, were very highly disciplined practices. But those, I think for me, it was, yeah, I had a very strong intellect, but I also was very passionate emotionally. So I was very sensitive. Violin for me was a great vehicle for my heart and my emotions. My mother was very emotionally alive, so was my grandfather, and I was really brought up to be that way. So I don't think that that was really, I don't think that was it for me. I think what it trained me to do, the Zen training and the Zazen practice and the Vipassana practices and all of those kinds of practices, I would say really are profound trainings in bringing attention into the sensory realm. So shifting out of mental processing into breathing, into sensing, into imagery and so forth, because when you go into your five senses and out of thinking, and this is important for people today, I think it's why mindfulness practices are so popular, because there's so much overemphasis on thinking, especially with internet and, you know, people are just so informationally top heavy these days, that what we really need is to balance it with more kinesthetic awareness, more body awareness. And that's very, very important. So it is very much a body practice. It's very much a kinesthetic practice. And of course, all of the Qigong practices and martial art practices and Aikido practice, all of those are very, Tai Chi practices, those on the deep level are really working with the awakened energy system conscious through the physical body. And those practices ultimately were all Enlightenment practices. They're all connected to Enlightenment practices as well. So, of course, they can be done in a way that isn't that way, and they usually are because the people teaching them aren't realized. So people are just doing exercise, which is fine, but when you're lucky enough to have a master or a teacher who's truly realized and gets it, and you can begin to get that kind of entrainment and that kind of guidance, then it's a whole nother level.
I wonder if is it difficult for a lot of beginning, like people who are just getting on the seeking of spiritually, is that difficult for them to put their awareness in their body? Because I feel like if they're growing up in our culture where maybe they've been taught to.
It's hard for everybody. I mean, there's nobody that doesn't have difficulty with that. It's like, you know, that's why the training very much is that you bring your attention back to the breath and you just notice the natural thing. And instantly your mind's off tripping somewhere. You're off daydreaming, you're fantasizing, you're in an internal argument, whatever's going on. And it's like, you know, what Eckhart calls the mental noise. You know, it's just, it's very magnetic and addictive. So you have to learn how to redirect. So meditation practice really is more a kind of discipline training of learning how to bring your attention back to your sensory experience, your energetic experience, free of judgment, free of control, free of force, and the quality of how you bring attention back is very, very important. And eventually, as your attention and your sensitivity develop, it's not just that you're bringing attention to what's happening, it's how you're bringing attention to what's happening. And I work with a lot of people on really refining that, because there's a way in which you can bring attention to what's happening that actually still interferes with awakening, completely interferes, keeps you stuck in ego, even though you're meditating for 30 years. And so on a cushion, even in a monastery, I've worked with a lot of people who've been in monasteries for decades who become students who got stuck in those environments. It's common, actually. And so very easy to happen. There's so much more nuance in the process. And so that's why having a mentor or having someone who can really tune in with you, because when I work with people, I'm not just, I mean, right now I'm jabbing, you know, I'm jabbering. I'm like all over the place. It's not like we're having a session. If I were working with you right now, I would guide you to pay attention. I would tune in with you. And I was having an interview with somebody a while back. I think the interview's on my website. She started having like kriyas during the interview because she was getting what we call transmission of the teaching. So that can happen. And so it's very much a kind of psychic biofeedback process of communicating when I'm working with an individual. It's not intellectual based. It's even though there's a cognitive aspect of it, therapeutic aspect of it, it's fundamentally connected. So when I'm working with someone, there's a sense of tuning into them and deeply being aware of what's going on in them. and then helping them become more aware and how they're becoming aware of that. And if there's a way in which they're becoming aware of it that's actually facilitating this evolutionary force that's breaking through the paradigm of identity, or whether it's keeping that intact. And that's mostly what practice is. So when Shakyamuni Buddha, Siddhartha Gautama, the Buddha, 2,500 years ago, talked about the middle way, what he was talking about was that the middle way is really being able to be cognizant of the unconscious conditioned mind processing and the unconditioned reality, awakened consciousness, right? Both sides. And the middle way was that interface between them both. And so practice is going back and forth between understanding one's relative conditioning and being connected in the present. So people can come on retreat and instantly they tell me, or they come to satsang or something, and instantly it's like, oh my God, I just felt the energy. It was just incredible. A friend of mine who I've known for a long time who needed help came by to see me yesterday, and he was suffering a great deal and heartbreak. And immediately came in my apartment and just sat down and said, oh my God, he just immediately just went, oh, he felt the energy. The presence is just here all the time. And that's a working field. I lost my train, lost where I was going. Sorry, happens sometimes.
That's all right, because I have something to add. Okay. About a year ago when I watched your first satsang on YouTube, literally the first minute I started watching, I started having tears down my eyes. And I was kind of wondering like what's going on. And then I noticed that at your satsangs, you have some people, they might raise their hand, they might be having a difficult time or maybe a wonderful time, and they come and sit kind of right in front of you. So right. I guess my question is like, what is happening in the moment when these people come up closer to you and ask individualized questions and things like this?
Well, I think each individual would describe that differently for them. For me, it's, there's just an open field of awareness that's available for whatever shows up there. And because there's a kind of instantaneous psychic biofeedback screen sharing that's going on in my own consciousness, I'm able to kind of almost intuitively sense what's going on with somebody, and they'll share, and I can help them pay attention, either verbally or even non-verbally, into their experience in a way that seems to, a lot of how this works, Kyle, nobody knows, but I'm really in service to that which is working. So we often find that if someone comes up, let's say they have something that's really weighing on them, a problem in their life or some difficulty with their health or financial situation or relationship situation or work situation, whatever it is. And they come up and they share the kind of essence of what that is. It's not just a head trip that they're running in their head, but it's really they express the truth and the emotional truth of the condition. And something about offering that into the space that's there causes something to happen where all of a sudden the burden's lifted. It's like a miracle. And that's really what satsang is. It's really the space where where you offer whatever the condition is. And that's ultimately what profound meditation practice is, if you really understand. That you, in a sense, are surrendering yourself into the infinite. That's really what it is. That's what happened to me at 16. It's no different. I didn't know that was happening, but now looking back, it's obvious that's what happened. And, but you can look back and conceptualize it after the fact, but the truth is the reality of it is non-conceptual and not explainable. And it's not like you can learn the steps. People think you can learn the steps and then they're going to get enlightened, and that's not really how it works.
So I heard a phrase, there's lots of roads to California.
That's funny. Yeah, right.
I'm wondering, does each individual, like, because they're have such unique, body, mind structure? Like, is the path unique for each?
Yes, it is. And the path is absolutely, the unfoldment of the path for each individual is unique. And I really help people get in touch with how their process is working, rather than to try to follow me or someone else's process. Now, the essence of what's facilitating it is a universal. That's the presence. That's what you get in satsang. That's what you get in the relationship with working with me or being on in my events and things, is that you will get attuned into that universal frequency of presence. It's not personal. It's not John. It's not somebody else. It's not you. It's not me. When that's operating, there's no you and there's no me. Okay. So that's like the infinite microwave that's cooking us from the inside out. That's what that is. And so we attune to that. And my job fundamentally, that's what Jean Klein did for me. And fundamentally, when I met with him and we were connected in that way, he basically said to me, you totally understand. This is it. You got it. This is it. This is all you need to follow. You don't need any intellectual input. All you need is to follow this, eventually be permanent. And that's exactly what happened. I didn't have to have one more thought about it. I thought, oh, what a relief. It was like this huge, because I had walls of books behind me. That was walls of books, and not anymore. And I had a whole nother room, filled with every spiritual book I'd read, and I didn't need them anymore. It was clearly happening right now. And I didn't know how it was happening. I still don't know how it's happening. You don't know how it's happening. No one knows how it's happening. Do you want to know how it's happening? Of course, that's human nature. Just because you want to feel secure, you want to feel safe, you want to feel like you're not being ripped off or going down the wrong path or deluding yourself. I get that. I mean, I had somebody on my online satsang recently from Bulgaria, I think, and he was saying, I think this is all fake. And I laughed. I said, great, I'm so glad you could share that. That's wonderful. I said, what do you mean? He shared about it. And I said, well, all this is here is about you getting in touch with what you're really feeling and being honest about it. That's what we're doing here. That's all it is. This is about becoming authentically yourself on a relative level. And if you truly understand how to do that with honesty and openness and the willingness to question, and you are truly in a transformative process, awakening and enlightenment are just going to happen naturally in their own way. And you'll find out how that works for you. So that's the great, beautiful discovery, and the miracle of this is that it is so unique to each individual and how it shows us how to find the way. No one can tell you. But can someone else help you like this in terms of resonating with the field of who you are and helping you get in touch with that? That's what I do all the time. That's what my teachers did for me. And that's what I do for my students. Same thing. So that's really what's called the transmission of the Dharma. That's what that means, really. It's not I loved how my teacher, Jon Klein, said it once. He said, when there's no one taking themselves to be a student and no one taking themselves to be a teacher, then teaching takes place. Then that connectedness is right here. So when you're tuned in that way, you can feel maybe a sense of connection or resonance or spaciousness or whatever. At the same time, you might start feeling like that pain in your chest or that sadness in your heart or whatever it is. And then you learn how to allow that rather than say, oh, I'm not supposed to feel that anymore. Now I need to be spiritual. See, that's where people really can go seriously wrong. And that's what I'm here to help you with, not having that happen, so they can learn how to actually take that added presence and learn how to heal themselves. I'm actually, the cutting edge of my own practice right now lately has been working with my health, because I have some genetic stuff that's caused physical problems that are, just congenital. I was born with this. And I'm actually succeeding in changing some of my genetic structure through bringing together this deep practice and awareness, what I learned from my Qigong master, and this profound awareness and so forth. I think each individual has to not only realize if it's true for them, but then find out how that brings them into the world as a unique contribution in the world as them, not just following a bunch of other people who are followers. That's not it. We need people who are alive and connected today. That's more and more. So I'm much more interested in having people discover this, having realized it, and then finding out how they bring it into their life and their work and their relationships and have it transform those environments, because that's what we need today. That's what's happening. And I think that is the evolution happening today. And I hope we make it. That's why I'm here meeting with you. I'm interested in helping as many people as possible. And I'm totally available for that.
Yeah, well, I appreciate your time today, John. This was a lot of fun.
Oh, I appreciate your time. I'm sorry that I talked so much. I hope it was helpful.
Oh, very, very helpful. Yeah.
Okay.
I was just kind of a ending conclusion is like, I was kind of thinking of how a lot of people are trying to end their suffering and their individuality and become awakened and
Yeah.
put that on their resume. But it seems like it's also like a starting point. Like, okay, this is phase one, phase two, it just continues.
Well, the truth is, if someone is truly realized, there's no identity in it at all. There's no one who says, "Hey, I'm realized." No. Not only that, but every moment then is a beginning. Every moment is a learning. Every moment is an opportunity to pay attention and learn and be available. That's what life is. So it actually is the realization that life only is right now, fully, completely, that fulfillment is right now. It's not somewhere else. It's not when you get somewhere else or do something. I'm not saying there isn't relative fulfillment somewhere else. Yeah, of course. You can have your goals, you can have your aspirations, you can go to med school and become a doctor, you can become a CEO of a multinational corporation, or a father of your children, or whatever a mother of your, whatever your life is about. But it's really that you will be living fully each moment, regardless of what challenges you have to deal with in your life. Because let's face it, people have all kinds of challenges. Human life is fraught with challenges, and we have ups and downs. It's a roller coaster. People think they're going to get to a place where there's no more problems. I don't know that fantasy land. Now, is there an attitude that's different, that approaches what we call problems differently? Absolutely. Are there profound attitudinal shifts that change the way we approach the difficulties? Absolutely. No question about that. So will that happen if it's authentic? For sure. And it just gets better. I mean, I tell people, hang in there. It's hard work. It's worth it. It's worth the hard work. It will get better. It can seem like it's getting worse. It can seem like you're going backwards, but give me a call and we'll see.
Well, thanks again, John.
Absolutely, Kyle. It's good to see you.
Yeah, good to see you. Have
Okay.
a good rest of your day.
You too. Take good care.
Yep. All right. Bye.
Bye.